We're grateful for each and every one of you. Let us know where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Now, let's begin. Looking back, I wonder if there was ever a moment when it all started to fall apart. One single instance when I could have stopped it, when I could have changed everything. But that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow, creeping thing, poisoning every corner of your life before you even realize it's there. 4 or 5 years. I thought I had the perfect marriage. I built a life with a woman I adored. I worked hard, climbed my way up in my career, and made sure she never had to worry about anything. We had laughter, late-night conversations, shared dreams, and intimacy that made everything else fade away. Or at least, I thought we did. But in the end, none of it mattered. Because while I was devoted to her, she was devoted to someone else. It started subtly, little changes that didn't seem important at first. The way she'd come home later than usual, brushing off my questions with half-hearted excuses. The way she stopped reaching for me at night. How she turned away when I kissed her. The way her phone never left her hand, always tilted just out of my sight. I noticed, of course I noticed, but I convinced myself it was nothing. I was wrong. By the time I realized the truth, I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to destroy her. We used to be inseparable. In the first years of our marriage, we were a team. We shared everything, our ambitions, our struggles, our victories. She used to listen to me talk about work, about how I fought to prove myself in a world that valued degrees over skill. She used to admire me. But then, she changed. It wasn't just a physical distance. It was the emotional wall she built between us. She started acting like I was in the way, like I was someone she tolerated rather than someone she loved. The late nights at work became more frequent. The small, affectionate touches we used to share, the way she'd run her fingers through my hair, the way she'd lean against me on the couch, disappeared. Then came the dismissive remarks. "You wouldn't understand," she'd say whenever I asked about her work. "You're being paranoid," she'd snap whenever I brought up her constant texting. And maybe the worst, an empty look in her eyes whenever I said, "I love you." The warmth that used to be there was gone, replaced by something colder, something distant, something wrong. She thought I wouldn't find out. She thought she was smarter than me. I can still remember the exact moment when my world shattered, the moment when I knew. She had given me her old iPad, casually asking me to wipe it clean so she could give it to her niece. She did it without hesitation, like she didn't even consider the possibility that I'd check it first. But I did, and what I found destroyed me. Texts, photos, videos. Her and her boss laughing, flirting. Months' worth of messages detailing every disgusting secret they thought they had hidden so well. I read through them all, my hands trembling, my breath shallow. And that's when I realized she had never respected me. I wasn't just her husband. I was her backup plan. It wasn't just the affair that broke me. It was the way she talked about me, the way she belittled me in those messages. He's so boring these days. He just talks about work all the time. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending. I need someone who excites me. I wasn't just being cheated on. I was being mocked. While I was out there breaking my back to build a future for us, she was in another man's bed, laughing at me behind my back. But here's the thing about betrayal. It creates something new inside of you, something cold, something ruthless. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't just going to leave her. I was going to make her regret ever thinking I was weak. Revenge is best served cold. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I started planning. I documented everything, every message, every image, every timestamp. I hired a private investigator to make sure I had irrefutable proof. Then I started changing things at home. Little things. I stopped trying. I stopped asking where she was going, stopped reaching for her. And she noticed. "Are you okay?" she asked one evening, her brow furrowed. I just smiled. "Yeah, just busy." And she actually looked relieved. That's when I knew. She wanted me to be passive. She wanted me to be weak, which made what I was about to do even sweeter. The day she got served was the day her world fell apart. She was at work, standing with her colleagues, laughing like nothing was wrong. The process server walked in, a large box in his hands. "Are you wife's name?" he asked. She turned, her smile still in place. "Yes." He set the box down. "You've been served." She opened it. Inside was a cake, decorated with an edible image of her and her boss. The words ice above it read, "Here's your cake. Eat it too." Her face drained of color. The room fell deathly silent. And then the whisper started. The shock, the humiliation, the pure unfiltered horror. She turned to me, eyes wide, breath ragged. "You did this." I just smiled. "Enjoy your day." Then I walked out, and I never looked back. Humiliation is a slow, creeping poison, one that takes time to fully sink in. And my wife, the woman who had treated me like a joke, like an afterthought, was now drowning in it. She never came home that night. Instead, her mother called me, her voice tight with suppressed rage. "She's staying with me." I didn't even ask why. I knew she couldn't face me, not after what I had done. The day after a public disgrace, I started hearing whispers. Her so-called friends at work were already turning against her. The boss she had sacrificed our marriage for, he had already cut her loose. I knew how corporate games worked. A man like him wouldn't risk his reputation over some office affair. He'd throw her to the wolves to save himself. And that's exactly what happened. By the end of the week, she had been quietly transferred to another department. A demotion, hidden under the guise of restructuring. Her colleagues distanced themselves. Whispers replaced greetings. She had traded everything we built for a cheap, fleeting affair, and now she had nothing. She finally texted me, "Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then locked my phone and went back to what I was doing. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. An hour later, another message came through. "Please, I just want to explain." I laughed under my breath. Explain what? There was nothing left to explain. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. The next evening, she showed up at my house. I didn't let her in. She stood outside, shivering in the cold, arms wrapped around herself. "Please," she whispered, "just 5 minutes." I met her eyes through the glass door, and then, without a word, I turned and walked away. Let her feel it. Let her feel exactly what I had felt. Her job wasn't the only thing crumbling. Her so-called friends, the ones who had encouraged her to do better than me, had already abandoned her the minute the scandal broke. They cut ties to protect themselves. Now, she was truly alone. She sent another text. "I made a mistake." "That one," I answered. "Yes, you did." That was all she got. She tried calling. I let it ring. She tried coming to the house again, but this time I wasn't even there. She was drowning, and I was just watching, letting it happen. And she deserved every second of it. The next time I saw her, she looked like a shadow of the woman I once knew. Her hair was unkempt, dark circles under her eyes. She had lost weight. Good. She sat across from me in a cafe, wringing her hands like a child caught in a lie. She started, her voice cracking. "I don't know how I got this far." I let the silence stretch between us, unforgiving, unbreakable. "You don't." I finally said, tilting my head, "You destroyed our marriage. You mocked me while you were screwing your boss. And now that your world is falling apart, you don't know how it got this far?" Tears welled in her eyes. I felt nothing. "I was stupid," she whispered. "I let people get in my head. They made me feel like I was missing out, like I was settling." I leaned back, arms crossed. And now, she swallowed hard. Now I realized I was an idiot. I lost everything. And for what? Some meaningless fling. I studied her. This wasn't guilt. This was fear. Not fear of losing me. Fear of being alone. "Please," she said, reaching across the table, "just tell me if there's a chance. Any chance at all." I looked her dead in the eye. "No." She flinched like I had slapped her. "Please." She tried again, her voice trembling. "We can fix this." I stood, throwing some cash on the table. "Fix it." I scoffed. "You can't fix what's already dead." And then I walked away. For the first time in months, I felt light, because I was finally free. She refused to accept it. She tried reaching out to my family. They shut her down. She tried begging mutual friends. They refused to help. She tried asking for another meeting. I ignored her. Then she made her biggest mistake. She tried to manipulate me. If we divorce, you know I'll get half, right? That made me smile, because she had no idea. The divorce proceedings began, and I had been 10 steps ahead the entire time. Before I even confronted her, I had moved my assets. Every dollar that was legally mine was placed somewhere untouchable. She thought she'd walk away with half. She was walking away with nothing. Her lawyer tried to fight it. But I had proof. Proof of her affair, proof of her financial irresponsibility, proof of her deceit. The judge saw through her. By the time it was over, she left with only what she had brought into the marriage. Nothing more, nothing less. After the final ruling, she tried one last time. She showed up at my door, tears streaming down her face. "I have nothing left," she whispered. I met her gaze, cold and unforgiving. "And whose fault is that?" She sobbed. "Please, I don't know where to go." I stepped back, and then, with the same smirk she once gave me when she thought she had won, I closed the door in her face. The day she walked out of that courtroom, she wasn't the same woman I had once known. Her confidence, her arrogance, it had all crumbled into dust. She didn't just lose the case, she lost everything. As she stumbled to the courthouse doors, I watched from a distance, arms folded, leaning casually against my car. She looked lost, like someone who had spent years climbing a ladder only to realize too late that it was leaning against the wrong wall. Her lawyer left without a word. Even he knew she had destroyed herself. She stood there motionless, her purse clutched in white-knuckled hands. I could see the realization hitting her. She had spent so much time trying to play the game, lying, cheating, manipulating, thinking she could control the outcome. But the house of cards had collapsed, and she was standing in the wreckage alone. I watched as she pulled out her phone, trying to call someone, her boss, one of her friends. It didn't matter, because one by one, they were all abandoning her. Her boss had already thrown her to the wolves. His career, his marriage, his reputation. It was all more important to him than she ever was. Her so-called friends, the ones who whispered in her ear, convincing her she deserved better, were nowhere to be found. She had played her hand, and now she was left with nothing. And as I drove away, I couldn't help but smile, because justice, after all, had never tasted so sweet. This narrative is a powerful exploration of betrayal, self-respect, and the journey toward personal freedom. It delves into the emotional aftermath of a broken relationship, where one person emerges stronger, while the other is left to grapple with the consequences of their actions. The protagonist's journey is one of reclaiming their life, finding peace, and ultimately moving on from a toxic situation. The story highlights several key themes. 1. Betrayal and consequences. The protagonist's ex-partner faces the fallout of her actions, losing trust, relationships, financial stability, and ultimately herself. Her choices lead isolation and regret, while the protagonist finds liberation in letting go. 2. Self-worth and independence ****. The protagonist's refusal to engage with her pleas for sympathy or reconciliation underscores their commitment to self-respect. By prioritizing their own well-being, they demonstrate that true strength lies in walking away from toxicity. 3. The nature of revenge. The story redefines revenge not as a dramatic confrontation, but as the act of removing oneself from the influence of someone who caused harm. The protagonist's victory is in their indifference and ability to live a fulfilling life without the weight of the past. 4. Growth and moving on. The protagonist's journey is one of personal growth, rediscovering themselves, building new connections, and embracing a life free from emotional turmoil. Their ability to move forward contrasts sharply with the ex-partner's stagnation and decline. 5. Empathy and pity. The protagonist's acknowledgement of pity rather than hate adds depth to their character. It reflects an understanding that the ex-partner's downfall was self-inflicted, and the protagonist's attachment is rooted in self-preservation rather than malice. This narrative serves as a reminder that healing and moving on are not about seeking retribution, but about finding peace within oneself. The protagonist's ultimate victory is their ability to live a life unburdened by the past, while the ex-partner is left to carry the weight of her choices. It's a poignant reflection on the power of self-respect and the importance of letting go.